When Nancy woke up, she found nothing unusual. Morning seemed normal. She had stood up and headed to prepare her coffee in the kitchen. She felt nothing odd while making the coffee till she felt discomfort in her shoulder. Almost ready to pour it into her cup, she shrieked as she investigated it. 40-year-old. Nancy belonged to the single woman category. She had dated in the past, but it had simply never worked out. She hoped this time it would be different. She devoted much effort to getting ready for the date. She truly wanted it to go perfectly, and it would be their first in-person meeting. She had met the man online, though. And no, it was a long shot. Even now everything was going to go according. The date was unremarkable. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to see him once more since he truly seemed not very interested. She knew she didn't, though. That next morning, Nancy noticed something unusual about her shoulder early the morning following her date. It stung a little. But it wasn't until she examined it closely that she realized why her shoulder was aching, and it terrified her much. What was her situation like? Nancy's shoulder was covered with minute holes. Perhaps something had adhered to her shoulder, she thought. But as she brought it closer, she discovered the holes were pitting into her skin. She continued pressing on it with her fingers, and it stung somewhat more. Nancy pondered a little. Perhaps some insect bit her or possibly crawled inside her. Perhaps it had latched onto her shoulder in the evening. But she had never seen an insect act in such manner. Nancy looked online and concluded that something worse had to be the cause. No bug had done this. Nancy seemed more disoriented the more she stared at her shoulder. These were more than simply little holes. They contained something. She knew something else was there. She couldn't make it out. The holes were hard. And whatever it was inside was hard too. She had just the notion since she had to accomplish something. Nancy resolved to attempt using tweezers to extract whatever it was in her shoulder. She went to the restroom and reached for her tweezers. But she stopped before she could dig into her shoulder. She had no idea what she was dealing with actually. She had to act even if doing something could make it much worse. Nancy favored doing things on her own. She hated doctors. She disliked the thought of visiting the doctor. But she knew this wasn't something she could manage by herself. She hardly would go until things was quite awful. She thus jumped right forward and phoned the doctor. That same afternoon, the doctor's office arranged a semi-emergency visit. They assured her that although others would be ahead of her, they would most certainly see her by the end of the day. The doctor advised Nancy to take care of him in the interim. He counseled her to consider anything unusual lately that might have led to this. It would be very beneficial for the doctor in determining exactly what was wrong. Nancy hung the phone after agreeing to consider it. What might have done this? She truly lacked knowledge. Nancy went back over the past week. She had not especially done anything unusual. A few days previously, she had gone on a trip through the forest. She could have readily touched something out there, perhaps a contaminated piece of moss or a mushroom. That is most certainly a possibility. But Nancy kept considering, and the climb didn't make much sense. Other people had certainly gone hiking on that same path. It was a common path. She wouldn't be the first to be going through this. There would have to be other indicators. She resolved to rule it out as her response. There must have been something else. One struggled to come up with anything deviating from normal. Nancy was a normal woman. She went to the neighborhood coffee shop and seldom did anything except hike sometimes. She stayed indoors rather much and worked from home. She genuinely was a dull person. Then it struck her, there was something else that seemed unusual. The evening before Nancy had gone on a date. After some time of online conversation with the man, she finally made the decision to go on a date. Nancy had been eager to experiment once more in dating. She was hopeful this date would go great even if she still hadn't found her soulmate. From the time the date started, things took an unanticipated turn. Nancy sensed an oddity about the man. She seemed almost to hate him. Not very interested in him. But he would show her investment as soon as she would start considering this. Though the date seemed unusual, there was more. When she thought back, Nancy wasn't sure why she had even gotten in touch with him first. She could see more and more from her messages with him that she truly disliked him. She hadn't been thinking clearly and had simply been quite desperate. Could he be responsible for all this? They hadn't gotten physical at all. And Nancy hadn't spoken to him since last night. She couldn't see how he would have anything to do with it. She also hadn't messaged him, though she wasn't sure. Nancy had to make her appointment. Regarding her shoulder, she knew nothing about what to do. She departed for the appointment, still thinking as she drove to the doctor's office. But she came up with nothing. Fortunately, her shoulder's holes seemed to be not too shifting. She remained in her car for a moment once she got to the doctor's office, attempting to come up with more questions. Nancy actually had no idea of anything else. She inhaled deeply to relax her anxiety and entered the doctor's office, signing in. Although she knew she would have to wait a lot of time to see the doctor, others had different ideas. Nancy was drawing an absurd lot of attention in the doctor's office waiting room. By now her shoulder's holes were somewhat obvious, and everyone around her was startled by what they were seeing. Nancy didn't pay much attention until the other people's growing obvious interest caught her eye. The other office staff members didn't try to stifle their interest. The few children there wanted to explore, but their parents kept them back. Still, it was as though everyone forgot why they were there with their own medical complaints. Everyone wanted to know what she was going through. Nancy also followed this. That's when the doctor emerged to call in the next patient. Everyone there decided Nancy ought to be seen first. Although none of their issues were major, Nancy's was obviously. This little turned off Nancy. But she still thanked them, though that was worrying. She could probably wait. The medical professional disagreed. The doctor was startled when he could properly see Nancy's shoulder once inside his office. Nothing like this he had ever seen. He would remember if he had. Something like this wasn't something you simply overlooked. More alarming still, the doctor was ignorant. He had not ever heard of anything like this in his medical texts. The doctor understood this would take some time. He called a few to arrange for his waiting patients to be forwarded to other doctors on call. Nancy most needed his focus. He was going to see to it they discovered a solution for whatever was causing problems here. The doctor requested tests for Nancy, and he examined her shoulder closely as they waited for the findings. The odd thing was that Nancy had felt some discomfort in the past, but not anymore. Her shoulder was totally numb. The doctor's pushing on it did not cause any pain. That presented a negative indication. The doctor kept looking at Nancy's shoulder, and he was let down when he got the first answers back. His prescribed tests had come back empty, though he could still take several other tests. He required Nancy's approval, and it would take a lot of her time. Nancy agreed to the tests. Meanwhile, the doctor, who still hadn't found anything useful, posted some images of Nancy's shoulder on a medical forum as they waited for those results. He was hoping some other doctor had seen anything similar previously. A while would pass before he received any reply. Nancy felt she needed some air and headed to use the loo. The forum sent the doctor a personal note while she was away. Opening it excitedly in search of the solution he had been looking for. He was lucky. Still, it was also bad news. Everything would have to shift quickly. Another doctor had encountered this illness previously. And if they did nothing quickly, it might become a quite major issue for everyone, including Nancy. The doctor repeated reading the message till he realized he had to act fast if another doctor was correct. After reading the forum message, Nancy's doctor waited for the results, which arrived practically right away. This was it. He received the results and became absolutely cold. That other doctor had been correct. Nancy's doctor exited his office. And shortly the entire building was inverted. Nancy came out of the bathroom and her shoulder looked bad, starting to spread across her arm. The holes where she knew she had to show the doctor. But just now she was growing very afraid. The only issue was that Nancy returned to his office empty-handed. The doctor absent. Nancy was choosing her course of action when she heard something behind her. Her just-passed door had been locked from the outside. She had been imprisoned in here. And to further matters, she could hear the doctor advising others to call the police. What was happening? Nancy begged for an explanation at the door. But nobody was there to hear her. Nobody was responding her questions as all the doctors and nurses were feverishly chatting to one another. All she was advised was to remain composed until the cops showed up. Nancy's staff's response to her shoulder made her nervous and terrified even more. What was wrong? Was her death imminent? 1,000,000 ideas were whirling through her head. She attempted to keep cool. But that was getting harder. Nancy did not want to pass go. Those worries soon enough become fury. Why was she not getting any conversation? Nancy started to kick the door without another thought. She needed to get out desperately. Nancy could not hear the doctors on the other side shouting for her to stop over her own pounding. She felt driven to leave. A few kicks later the door lock cracked and the door swung wide open. Nancy's doctor stood back as the folks on the other side began to yell. Nancy stood there, panting fiercely. Although opening the door had not been simple. She needed responses and someone had to explain what was happening right now. Nancy's doctor urged Nancy to remain back and ordered everyone else to flee. She couldn't be near to anyone right now. Nancy was resolved even though her doctor's expression revealed all she needed to know about her fate. She warned them she wouldn't back off until they responded. The past physician might talk. 3 armed police personnel entered the structure and found Nancy. Pointing at Nancy, the doctor yelled, "It's her." Feeling faint now, Nancy was the target of meticulous aim as all 3 cops pulled their guns. "What were you wondering?" Nancy instantly raised her hands into the air as the cops turned to look at her. She asked them all to simply tell her what was happening. She nearly started crying. The cops advised Nancy to back up as the holes on her shoulder had absorbed practically half of her arm already. Nancy should be isolated right away. One of the cops gently told her. But they would tell her everything. Nancy agreed to the terms but strongly informed them she wouldn't hesitate to open another door to find answers. Nobody was reassuring her. She was afraid. Nancy returned into the doctor's office. And the door shut after her. Nancy watched as the workers arrived laden with heavy cleaning supplies and began to clean everything, the walls, the flooring, the door, you name it. At last, the doctor arrived at the door to inform Nancy about things. Her doctor first apologized for not alerting Nancy about what was happening. He had been terrified. It was not every day that someone with a terrible flesh-eating virus arrived, and he had to follow protocols he had never used before. Though terrible, there was more. He went over with Nancy everything he had done the day before. Nancy had gone on a trek then that evening on a date. Fortunately for Nancy, the terrible date had not been the source of all this. Rather, it seemed more likely that she had touched some contaminated plant on her hike. But which one? Nancy unsure of what to tell them. She shared with her doctor and the police whatever path she had followed and what she had noticed that might be of use. Besides, what else could she do? Her concentration was mainly on the course of treatment. Would this illness eat her body off, or could they possibly treat her? Fortunately for Nancy, the hospital carried the required medication. Unfortunately, she would have to spend some time in isolation. The cops had become involved as they had to speak with Nancy about her hike. But they had panicked when they had saw her outside the isolated chamber, since her doctor had also frightened. Though there was a lot of filth, they also had to ensure that nobody else would become sick. Nancy was securely driven to a superior hospital where she could be isolated and receive virus-eating-her-arm-away treatment. Luckily, the medicine stopped the infection from proliferating, and within a few days it began to fix things. But about the plant? Following some intensive search, the police discovered a plant not native to the region after everyone had been off the track. It turned out to be Nancy's problem source after testing. It was dumped and uprooted. Since then, there have not been any occurrences. Within a month, Nancy was totally recovered and ready for dates once more. After watching the story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed our video, Nancy's process was going to reveal the damaging thing she had been doing all along. An eye-opener. Blair and her family were shocked to learn that, like all of us, she was dependent on a healthy habit that led her to a dental clinic. This commonplace item turned into a source of great sorrow and suffering, drawing the attention of all. Since both cleanliness and health are impacted by one another, they are strongly intertwined. What happens if something you've done since you were a child is called into question? The seemingly beneficial behavior ends up being a motive to hurt you. That's precisely what happened to Blair McCarthy. Though many people experience anxiety of visiting a dental facility or fear of having someone use instruments to peek into their mouth, it typically affects children and anyone who have had a negative dental encounter. Numerous figures show that even today, over 50% of people only visit the dentist for urgent dental care rather than routine examinations. Blair, anyway, never had any of it. Instead, she used to enjoy going to the dentist for her yearly examinations, anticipating that she wouldn't ever have any tooth problems. She hurried to the dentist in order to learn the disturbing reality. Adolescence is a stage of life marked by mood swings that nearly all adults can relate to. It's a time when our bodies go through various changes. The only age when we worry about our appearance the most is adolescence. Like other teenagers, Blair felt self-conscious about her appearance and only really focused on getting a small dental problem corrected. She wanted to have her teeth straightened because they weren't. Nobody could have predicted that what appeared to be a routine dental appointment would reveal a significant finding: health issues. In actuality, everyone makes an effort to maintain their health in one way or another. Still, most of us struggle to maintain control over our diets. We all know that the majority of us indulge in at least one harmful habit every day, and that very few people are able to stick to rigorous schedules. It might be staying up late or not getting any sleep at all, overindulging in junk food, skipping meals, consuming too much caffeine, not drinking enough water, smoking, or placing an inordinate amount of stress on oneself. Blair herself did miss a few things every day. However, one significant habit that she never wavered was that she used to get frequent dental checks and that she eventually intended to get braces, even after learning that certain of our habits are unhealthy. We are unable to give them up, which is acceptable in certain situations. But we can't deny that some habits are ingrained in us from an early age. Taking frequent baths, brushing your teeth, cleaning your hands before eating, and covering your mouth when you cough or sneeze are among the most popular of these healthy routines. It may bring back memories of your kindergarten years, when you memorized these fundamental manners. Blair was always trying to be fit and active, but she was much more conscious of her teeth than other people were. There's a good reason why dental hygiene has received so much attention. Maintaining oral health benefits your entire body. It also doesn't take a lot of work. 3 times a day. How much time and effort does it take to clean and floss your teeth? Almost 15 minutes a day. Blair's parents never had to remind her to brush or floss because she was always worried about personal hygiene. It all began when she at last had braces to straighten her teeth and create the ideal grin. Blair did exactly as the dentist had recommended for the next year. During the time she had her braces on, she went to the dentist for routine examinations. Eventually, the dentist informed her that the braces may be taken off the next week. Blair was first anxious because she thought she would have to wear the braces for more than a year. But after a year of following the dentist's recommendations, her teeth were in the right place. She was relieved that she wouldn't need to schedule a weekly visit with the dentist at last. Still, she had no idea that an even more pressing matter would force her to make an unscheduled trip to the clinic. The following visit, Blair had her braces removed. As previously discussed, the anticipation of showing off her flawless smile to her friends had her giddy with delight. At last, she could eat whatever she wanted. Seeing her joy after removing her braces for the first time was an emotional roller coaster for her parents, who had been anticipating this perfect day for their daughter. These great moments were about to transform into something horrific. But no one knew it at the time. Things appeared to be okay for Blair for about a week after she had her braces removed. She initially disregarded the slight discomfort in her gums since she thought it was just a natural part of the process, even though it wasn't your average ache. I was able to dismiss it as the typical discomfort felt for a few days following braces removal. However, it immediately necessitated a visit to the dentist for Blair. When this strange pain persisted for 7 days straight, the McCarthy family was bracing themselves for an unforeseen event. Blair eliminated it by taking a few pain relievers. The worst part was that she had no idea this was going to be her worst nightmare. Blair will soon learn the hard way that it's risky to disregard the discomfort or treat it lightly. Whatever it was, she wasn't particularly bothered by it at the moment, until her mother picked up on the strange part. Blair continued to disregard the discomfort while having a casual talk with her daughter over dinner. Sally paid close attention to her thoughts and opinions. Something so implausible that it had never occurred before caught her attention and diverted her attention. Something was wedged between Blair's teeth. Blair herself never skipped brushing her teeth, even if her mother suspected it was food. So, what was it? In an effort to remove it, Blair proceeded to the restroom. She attempted to brush her teeth, but that was also ineffective in removing it. Floss was the last choice. Like him, she tried it, but the object would not budge. At the same moment as Blair's anxiety level rose, she had a revelation about something else that might have anything to do with the foreign body in her gums. Blair could attribute the persistent agony she'd been experiencing for several days to the fact that, despite her best efforts, she was unable to remove this object. She was positive that the object was the source of the pain. Even after completing everything, she had no idea. She failed miserably in removing it. Conversely, her mother was also concerned. Mother was waiting outside the restroom as she came out to see how she was doing. Blair informed her mom that the device was definitely causing the pain in her mouth and that she couldn't take it off. The following day, she scheduled a visit to the dentist by calling ahead. What clung to Blair's gums shocked even the dentist. After years of trusting Dr. Klein, Sally finally scheduled an appointment with him. Blair patiently awaited his arrival in the dentist's chair. Sally pointed out the object's location to the dentist once he had focused the light on Blair's mouth. Although she examined the object intently, she was unable to identify it. Dr. Klein was compelled to examine it more closely. The good news is that he had a plan B ready. A brand new, cutting-edge intraoral camera was just purchased by Dr. Klein. The dentist would have a much easier time getting a good look at the thing caught in Blair's mouth because to the characteristics of this camera. This tool aids in the detection of anomalies and their magnification, allowing for a more precise diagnosis. Thanks to the new instrument, Dr. Klein was able to solve the riddle. Following the examination, Dr. Klein informed Blair and Sally that it was something blue. The dentist decided to check a few things with Blair before making any assumptions about this object. Blair, who was quite concerned about her health, was in for a rude awakening when he finally got his answer. The result of a series of questions he had asked her. Dr. Klein wanted to know for sure if Blair had eaten anything blue in the previous few days. Blair recalled, but the woman denied having anything that could stain her teeth blue. The dentist wasn't satisfied with her guess that it might be sweets or sprinkled donuts. Blair couldn't come up with anything blue, despite the fact that she was a foodie who occasionally tried new cuisines. There were so many cameras staring into Blair's mouth that even Dr. Klein could tell it wasn't food. Nevertheless, he asked her some questions anyhow. In order to confirm his suspicion, he enlarged the view of the blue object. Dr. Klein was able to confirm that it was indeed plastic after waiting 5 to 10 minutes. Sticking a piece of plastic into one's mouth was nonetheless a reasonable concern. But the way it got there was even more astonishing. The doctor's last explanation served solely as a warning to the rest of the globe. Blair, on the other hand, was having a mental flashback to the previous few days. She couldn't recall attempting to use her mouth to unzip a plastic bag. She considered the likelihood that she had overindulged in her pen cap chewing. Blair, to be honest, was only speculating. She had no idea how this plastic fragment ended up in her mouth. Dr. Klein was considering it more carefully, trying to figure out what this piece of plastic was and what might have happened. At that moment, A single possibility persisted in his thoughts. He turned his chair to face Sally and Blair, only to pose an odd inquiry to them. Blair was questioned by Dr. Klein on the brand of toothpaste she had been using. She believed that the blue plastic in her gums had nothing to do with her toothpaste and that the question was meaningless. Still, knowing the response, she answered, thinking the dentist would at least now explain things to her in a way she could grasp. Blair introduced him to the Crest 3D white toothpaste that she had been using for years. She had always loved this particular toothpaste. Blair was shocked beyond belief when Dr. Klein broke the terrible news to her. But the time for hearing it was drawing near. Blair's mother and Dr. Klein began to explain to Blair that the tiny piece of plastic lodged in her teeth was actually just a tiny plastic bead from her toothpaste. These crystal beads are meant to clean your mouth, right? So how could it be Blair's source of suffering? Blair wasn't the only one using toothpaste with microbads, though. And everyone was going to be concerned about this. Polyethylene is used to make these microbads. Not only does Blair's toothpaste contain beads, but the majority of Crest Pro Health products do as well. Dr. Klein claims that these beads aren't as soluble as we may have believed and that they can easily become lodged in our teeth, where they will remain for far longer than anyone would have imagined. Sally and Blair were in complete disbelief at what they were hearing. In an interview, Sally expressed her surprise at learning that this was happening. Blair even felt guilty for not realizing this earlier. Why are we still unaware of this? Why are we only learning about this at this point, she said. They posed queries that would naturally come to mind for anyone. A news channel was soon to look for answers on behalf of everyone who required them, even though not all of their issues had been addressed. A local news station was informed of Blair's incident. A group of reporters used an experiment to begin their investigation into the toothpaste. They filled a coffee filter with toothpaste and ran hot water over it. The beads remained in the filter and hadn't disintegrated after a few minutes. The journalist was correct to doubt that many individuals had previously experienced this. After speaking with a number of Tampa Bay area dentists, the reporters discovered that this occurs frequently. The dentist informed them that they see individuals like this frequently these days, as bacteria accumulate around it over time. The area becomes inflamed. It might possibly be an issue, Dr. Klein clarified. However, why are those beads present at all? According to Dr. Klein, they serve only as adornment and offer no benefit in terms of flavor or cleansing. He said that we ought to use brands that don't contain microbads. He was positive that these beads serve no use. What about Blair's dental health? Fortunately, Blair's teeth did not suffer too much when the bead was taken out. That day, Blair came home with a lot of unexpected information. Upon being notified and asked if any action should be taken, the American Dental Association responded, "Not really," according to an ADA statement. At this point, clinically relevant dental health studies do not indicate that the seal should be removed from toothpaste that contains polyethylene microbads. Even a request to take off the bead stamp of approval was turned down by the association. The parent firm of the brand took a significant step to preserve its reputation in the wake of all that. The firm that manufactures Crest toothpaste was committed to finding a solution. "We will remove the ingredient as we recognize there is a growing preference for us to do so. Their goal is to get rid of the beads. And they've promised their customers that they won't sell any items that contain beads." After watching the story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.